Luxury cars, mansions, business empires. These are the things most people think of when they hear the name Mkhize. But recently, her glittering world has been shaken by a fierce battle with SARS, as fraud accusations swirl around her empire. But what is the truth? Are Mkhize's lavish homes, flashy cars, and extravagant lifestyle built on dishonest dealings? What's really behind her war with SARS? And what does it mean for South Africa's economy? Stick with us as we uncover the untold truth. According to Forbes, Mkhize, the South African entrepreneur and larger-than-life public figure, was once estimated to be worth a staggering 350 million rand. For years, she has been celebrated as a symbol of wealth, power, and black excellence. But recently, all of that seems to be on shaky ground. The same woman who once inspired millions is now facing the possibility of losing everything she built. The question is, how did it all come to this? The answer may shock you. When we talk about Mkhize, we're talking about a woman who broke barriers in South Africa. She's bold, confident, and never afraid to showcase her lavish lifestyle. From luxury cars to extravagant homes, she has shared it all with the world through social media and her hit reality show. But it's in this very display of wealth that her troubles seem to have begun. Today, Mkhize stands at a crossroads. The South African Revenue Service, better known as SARS, has branded her and her businesses as fraudulent, accusing her of building her empire through questionable means. These allegations are not small. They carry the weight of possibly stripping her of the fortune, assets, and influence she worked so hard to secure. And as these charges loom over her, the line between fact and speculation has become increasingly blurred. This leaves us with burning questions. What is the real story behind Mkhize's wealth? What exactly went wrong between her and SARS? And perhaps the most controversial question of them all, is her money clean or not? To get these answers, we need to go back to the very beginning. Mkhize's journey didn't start with reality TV cameras or Rolls Royces parked outside her mansion. She was born and raised in KwaZulu-Natal, where she learned the value of hard work from an early age. Her background was humble, and her rise wasn't overnight. Over time, Mkhize was able to launch companies and started to grow a real business presence under the name Zikulisa. She reinvested, chased contracts, and used every opportunity to expand. Her company, Zikulisa Group, was a construction business that eventually put her on the map and attracted great success. But with great success comes great enemies as well. As her influence grew, so did the number of people watching Mkhize's every move. Not all of them had good intentions, and soon her empire would attract not only admiration, but also suspicion. Mkhize experienced a big shaking in her business in the year 2005, which marked the beginning of her problems with SARS. Their underground investigation of her company started during this time, and before long, Mkhize began facing allegations of financial misconduct. The details of these allegations included fraud and tax evasion. While this was already damaging to her business and public image, things didn't end here. Her world crumbled even more that same year when she was convicted of VAT fraud. The court's decision was clear. Mkhize was sentenced to 3 years in prison, suspended for 5 years, and fined 15,000 rand. On paper, this might not have seemed like the heaviest sentence, but the damage to her reputation was huge. For someone who was just rising in the construction industry, a conviction of this kind was like a scarlet letter. Newspapers carried the headlines. Critics whispered that her success had always been suspicious, and her competitors quietly celebrated what they saw as her downfall. But if people thought this was the end of Mkhize, they were mistaken. 7 years after her initial crisis with SARS, the struggle continued. In 2012, for the second time, Mkhize faced charges related to tax evasion and fraud. Once again, the authorities were suggesting that her empire had not been built on clean hands. Eyebrows were raised, not only because she was back in the spotlight for the same issues, but also because the specifics of the charges were never made fully public. The secrecy gave room for rumors to grow and for people to form their own stories about how she made her money. But one thing was becoming clear. Mkhize would not go down easily. Despite the serious accusations of VAT fraud, tax evasion, and other forms of misconduct, she never hesitated to deny the charges. She had her own arguments, and she made sure the public heard them. The only question was, what exactly were her arguments? The things Mkhize had to say about her issues with SARS left the South African population completely divided. When it came to her problems with SARS, Mkhize was not known to stay silent. However, she didn't openly speak up until 2013, when more problems unfolded. That year, SARS made a shocking declaration that sent the public spiraling. According to them, Mkhize owed a staggering 200 million rand in tax payments. To put this into perspective, at the time, her net worth was estimated at about 350 million rand. That meant she allegedly owed more than 57% of her total wealth to SARS. Imagine being told that more than half of everything you owned, the cars, the houses, the business profits, didn't actually belong to you. That wasn't just a small dispute with the taxman. It was a direct threat to erase her empire entirely. From that point, it became obvious that something huge was happening behind the scenes of Mkhize's finances. But the problems didn't stop there. Soon, her properties became targets too. Some of her buildings were marked as unsafe, and demolition orders followed. These demolitions didn't just mean financial loss. They became highly public, dramatic events that embarrassed her in front of the whole nation. Crowds gathered, the media reported live, and suddenly her name was being spoken, not as a symbol of wealth and power, but as someone whose empire was collapsing. For a woman who had built her reputation on success and stability, this was devastating. And yet, in the middle of all this chaos, something strange began to happen. Despite SARS's relentless pursuit, it became noticeable that the municipality seemed to be protecting Mkhize. While one government body was trying to take her down, another appeared to be shielding her. This contradiction left many confused and gave more fire to the debate. Was she guilty but too connected to be punished fully? Or was she truly being unfairly targeted while some officials still recognized her value to the economy? It was also during this period that Mkhize finally decided to speak openly about her problems. Talking about her battles with SARS, Mkhize's first response was clear. She denied all the allegations. According to her, she had done nothing wrong. She went further to say the accusations were not about fraud or unpaid taxes at all. They were driven by professional jealousy. Her theory was simple but powerful. Mkhize argued that she delivered quality construction work for cheaper rates, and this undercut the established players in the industry. That, she said, made her a target. She explained that her refusal to join the construction cartel, sometimes referred to as the construction mafia, only made matters worse. At the time, the South African construction industry was notorious for being dominated by a small group of companies. These firms controlled who got the biggest government contracts and at what price. They inflated costs, moved as a pack, and punished anyone who dared to break their monopoly. People within the industry often whispered about their power, even calling them a mafia because of their ability to crush competition. But Mkhize refused to play by their rules. Instead, she took a different approach, undercutting their inflated prices and offering quality services at cheaper rates. Her strategy was bold, and it won her contracts that many thought were impossible for a newcomer. But with every contract she secured, she earned not just profits, but also enemies. In her words, this was the real reason SARS came after her. She claimed the construction mafia, unhappy with her independence, used their influence to push government agencies to investigate and prosecute her. By refusing to bow to them, she had invited their wrath. This explanation divided the public. To some, it made perfect sense. A successful black woman refusing to bow to a cartel in a male-dominated industry would naturally attract enemies. To others, it sounded like a convenient excuse, a way to deflect from real financial wrongdoing. The media only added to the division. Some outlets ran stories that painted her as a victim of a corrupt system trying to destroy an independent woman. Others ran with the narrative that she was a fraud who had finally been caught. Supporters praised her courage, while critics accused her of arrogance. Still, Mkhize stuck to her defense. She was firm, consistent, and bold. She refused to let anyone paint her as a criminal, and her arguments kept her supporters rallying behind her. However, while SARS kept pressing charges and headlines kept circling, Mkhize was not just standing still. Intriguingly, it was right in the middle of this chaos that she made a decision that would change her life forever. Now let's talk about an era for Mkhize that was both a blessing and a curse. In the year 2020, Mkhize took some bold steps that changed the course of her life in a rather confusing way. She launched the show Mkhize, which would become a viral success within a very short time. Thanks to the show, Mkhize was no longer just a business tycoon, but also a celebrity with nationwide and international recognition. The reality series began airing in January 2020 on Mzansi Magic, and it opened up her private world to millions of South Africans who had only ever read about her in headlines. So, what was Mkhize really about? At its core, the show documented the daily life of Shauwn Mkhize, popularly known as Mkhize, her lavish lifestyle, and her family dynamics. It featured her children, Andile Mkhize, her son who was already carving out a name for himself in football and music, and Spale Mkhize, her stepdaughter and well-known fitness influencer. Audiences also got a peek at her staff, her inner circle, and the glamorous lifestyle she lived in her palatial Durban mansion, complete with luxury cars, endless parties, and high-profile guests. The show was more than just entertainment. It was a cultural event. South Africans tuned in every week, fascinated by the glitz and glamour, but also by the resilience and boldness Mkhize showed in balancing her empire, her family, and her growing public image. It was a mix of wealth, drama, and inspiration, and it became such a sensation that it went on to win the award for Best Reality TV Show at the Hollywood and African Prestigious Awards. Suddenly, Mkhize wasn't just a businesswoman, she was a household name. But with the success of the show came a new challenge: visibility. Thanks to Mkhize, her immense wealth and influence were no longer whispers in Durban social circles. They were broadcast to the world. Every episode showcased designer outfits, multi-million rand homes, fleets of luxury cars, and vacations abroad. For the ordinary viewer, it was aspirational, but for the South African Revenue Service, it was evidence. And now you might be wondering, was becoming a celebrity really a good idea for Mkhize? The answer to this question is quite obvious. Apparently, Mkhize would soon find out that being a public figure had its pros, but even more cons. And this brings us to the current disaster she now faces. In November 2024, SARS visited Mkhize again. This time, they weren't coming with just questions or letters. They had a preservation order, as well as a search and seizure warrant granted by the Durban High Court. This was a significant escalation. With the full weight of the law behind them, SARS officials, accompanied by police, raided Mkhize's luxurious La Lucia residence in Durban. For many South Africans, it was a shocking sight. One of the country's most famous businesswomen and reality TV stars, facing the kind of crackdown usually reserved for hardened criminals. The timing was even more damning. The raid came just as Mkhize was still basking in her status as a cultural icon. Now, headlines screamed of alleged tax evasion, fraud, and financial misconduct once again. And this time, the stakes were higher than ever. By December 2024, the situation worsened. Rumors began flying around that Royal AM Football Club, Mkhize's pride and joy, which she had invested heavily in and turned into a major brand in South African football, had been seized by SARS. For someone who had built an empire spanning construction, entertainment, and sports, the idea that her flagship football club could be stripped away was devastating. Her empire, piece by piece, seemed to be collapsing, but the blow wasn't just financial, it was deeply personal. And the effects didn't stop with her. The public was watching closely, and opinions on the matter were sharply divided. On one side, there were those who supported SARS wholeheartedly. To them, Mkhize was the embodiment of corruption and excess. Their argument was simple. While millions of South Africans struggled daily with poverty, unemployment, and poor housing, here was a woman flaunting unimaginable wealth on national television, wealth they believed had been built on fraud and evasion. Social media became a battleground. One angry tweet declared, "So-called black men and women, this is what they do. Flex on the poor after stealing from them. And Ike and his mother Mkhize won't have any funds to use in order to flex. SARS saved us. I love their downfall." Another tweet hit even harder, painting her as the face of systemic corruption. Meet Mkhize, a black woman in South Africa who is a multimillionaire that acquired her wealth through corruption. She didn't do anything to uplift the poor. Instead, she became a social media influencer and flexed her lifestyle. As it stands, the state is coming for everything she has. This woman's downfall is one of the best things to happen in South Africa. Whether true or not, the sentiment struck a chord. The second tweet, dripping with resentment, earned over 2,200 likes, showing just how many South Africans sided with SARS and saw Mkhize's downfall as justice served. But this wasn't the whole story. On the other side, a large portion of the public rallied behind Mkhize. To them, the attacks were racially charged and unfair. They pointed out that black business owners have historically been subjected to harsher scrutiny compared to their white counterparts, who often escaped the same level of punishment despite similar or worse allegations. For this group, Mkhize wasn't just a celebrity under fire. She was a symbol of black excellence being torn down by a system unwilling to see her succeed. Their call was not for her downfall, but for fairness and equality. This division created a bigger conversation in South Africa about wealth, race, and power. Was Mkhize guilty of fraud and tax evasion? Or was she simply being punished for daring to live loudly as a wealthy black woman in a country still grappling with deep inequality? Meanwhile, her family's response to the storm raised eyebrows. Rather than going silent, they doubled down on their lifestyle. On Instagram, her son Andile Mkhize was seen buying a brand new BMW and flaunting it on TikTok, as if to send a clear message. The Mkhize household was far from broken, yet at the same time, tweets circulated that SARS had officially announced the Royal AM Football Club was up for sale, with bidding starting at 1 million rand. The contrast between her family's continued flaunting of wealth and the alleged financial collapse was striking. No one knows how the ongoing struggle between Mkhize and SARS will end, What is certain, however, is that the story has already become one of the most significant legal and cultural sagas in South Africa's recent history. The significance of all this is huge. On one hand, it raises important questions about accountability, transparency, and how the wealthy are treated under the law. On the other, it forces the nation to confront uncomfortable truths about inequality, systemic bias, and the blurred lines between success and corruption. And so, as we look at Mkhize's journey, one truth remains. We haven't heard the last of it. Her life continues to unfold like the very reality show that first brought her fame, and we can only wonder about what comes next. And so we come to the end of today's video. Do you think Mkhize is being targeted or held accountable? Share your thoughts in the comments, like this video, and subscribe for more untold stories.